I don't allow snowflakes in my games. Welcome to my channel. I focus on tabletop role-playing games, video games, and science fiction. This is the second video I've done on this, but it's been a while, so I'll do it again. This whole concept of X cards and lines and veils has a strong odor of bovine fecal matter. And if you need that translated, I'll leave that for you to look up on Google. I have no time to waste on people who are offended by adult situations. Now, I only game with adults. I don't game with children. I've never been around children much in my life. So if you've got children, okay. I'll say children are a different, once you put children into that, it's a different environment. But if they're in their late teens, early 20s, or older, they should be able to handle adult situations. So let's talk about a simple adult situation. It happened to me. Have you ever had your dog hit by a car? Well, okay, that's a traumatic situation, and snowflakes would go, oh, but there's blood all over and so on. Well, okay, I don't want to be around those type of people, because if I am in a car accident, I want somebody to pull me out of the car, not be over on the side of the road crying. And that's what first responders deal with. I hate to say this, but it sounds to me like the people who are into these X cards with lines and veils have never been in the military, have never been in the police, have never been a first responder, have never worked in an emergency room, because you don't have time for that crap. So you're playing, let's say we're playing Dungeons and Dragons, and you pick up a dwarf, you're playing a dwarf, you pick up your battle axe and drive it through the skull of an orc. Now, are you squeamish about that? Okay. But, oh, how terrible it is that we can't talk about something else. Now, I've read a lot, and there's an interesting book, if you haven't read it, called Enemy at the Gates. Now, they made a movie about Enemy at the Gates, which is the Battle of Stalingrad. But the movie cut out a whole bunch of stuff, and focused on just the battle between the two snipers. And there's a section in the book Enemy at the Gates where the doctor is trying to figure out how he's going to tell all his nurses, who are nuns, that the Russian army has raped every female he's examined from age 4 to age 70, and most of them were gang raped. And he knows that when they come, that's what's going to happen to all the nuns. This is the reality of war. If you're offended by reality, well, okay, you're offended by reality, go off and live in your safe space and so on, but life is rough. If you're I heard Ivan mention things about being upset by terminal disease. Well, hey, I actually have done some videos about my terminal disease. For those of you who don't know, I have terminal cancer. I'm doing great right now, but I have a 50-50 chance of being alive by the end of the year. And if you want details, I can tell you exactly where the cancer is in my body and what it's doing, and I have very few side effects. But I've worked in medical and professional environments where we've had to deal with certain things like this. Now, the roughest one, and this was rough, was when I was working at a company preparing medical journals for data entry into electronic systems. And they were called the dead baby books. And there were a series of ones. The ones that are rough which actually, first time I'd ever seen women crying at work, and they would have to go off because they'd be preparing this stuff and have to read through. It was the training material to train doctors how to tell the difference between a normal accident and sexual abuse. And those were often with full photographs showing, so it could train doctors to identify the difference. That's a rough subject. I will admit that's a very, very rough subject. And I've had to deal with that in a professional setting, talking with people and dealing with that. And, when you see what's going on, that can really tug at your heartstrings. Don't get me wrong. But what happened, and I would tend to avoid pedophilia in my games. But that's about the only thing I wouldn't go into. Because we're talking, in most of the games I play Dungeons and Dragons, though you can do it with Traveler, you can do it with any of the post-apocalyptic games, whatever. Life is rough in real life. That you've got to go out there, and if you're swinging an axe to survive, to kill orcs or whatever, you're doing rough things. And it brings up the fun, interesting question. So there's this orc village which has been raiding this town, and so you go in and slaughter the orcs, and there are a bunch of orc children. What do you do with them? This is an interesting moral dilemma. Now, a lot of DMs will just avoid that and say there are no children, that it just doesn't do that. And what happens if you've got a female orc with a baby at her breast who is swinging an axe at you? Interesting situation. Do you swing back? Do you defend yourself? She's going to kill you. She's got blood in her eyes. She's going to kill you because you've probably killed her husband and her brother and all the others because they were doing what they did. And so now she, hey, it's the other one. Or you have, let's make it even more interesting, the one that's pregnant, that's attacking you. This is an interesting challenge. If you read the book Dune, and it talks about the women in Dune where they attack, and the one village, and it's how the women of the Fremen women, how they fought. And so you run into various concepts throughout literature and in fantasy about how rough life can actually be. And if you can't handle that, then I don't want you in my game table. I don't want you in my hangout. I want to deal with people who are adult enough and mature enough to deal with situations that get thrown at them. It's like you see I'll use the term wussification of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. For those of you who are old enough to ever have seen the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, when the pirates were chasing the women before they had to change things, because men don't chase women. That's sexist. Well, what do you think pirates did? They went in, they captured the women. What's the famous painting, Rape of the Sabine Women? And the story. Those are stories that you can fit into your fantasy realm that add some interesting depth and character. And this whole thing about, I don't want to talk about these terrible things. But you're willing to talk about killing monsters. And I've done this in several where the monsters that you're killing have children, they care for them, and so on, but they don't view you as sentient. You're just food. This gets into, some of the vampire situations where if you're playing a vampire, humans are just cattle. Do you really care what they think? and so on. And that puts an interesting light on this. So does that mean you can't play that because you're too much of a snowflake? Because we're talking about draining blood? You know, I watched in the news that there was a thing about some woman who was killed, and she was scalped and the blood drained from her. Yes, this actually happened recently. And you can look it up in the news. But things happen. And you think about how rough it is. And I remember I was in the service, and we were offloading vehicles we're offloading our armored vehicles off of a train in Germany. And we're about done, and so I'm standing around and I see there's this collision, and this guy gets pinned between two armored vehicles. And I turn, because right next to us is the medic track. And I go over and beat on the door, and the medic opens it, and I says, guy just got pinned between two vehicles. And the medic goes, you're joking. And I go, no. And he goes, you know, what's the phrase? White as a ghost, because he knows what's probably, the guy was lucky. They broke some ribs and he was hurt, but he didn't get killed, which was there. Now, anybody who's been around, you know, construction, one of the girls I grew up and went to high school with, her husband was in a construction accident and was killed instantly. And this was right after they had just found out she was like 4 months pregnant. And he was killed instantly. But that's life. You have to deal with what is in life. Now, if you're saying, oh, I don't want to deal with that in the game, that's fine. Go find another game. Don't come bothering me. If you're such a snowflake, I don't want to be around you. I cannot stand being around people who can't handle adult topics. It's partially because I've been in the military. If you've been in the military, and I see some of the fun stuff that's coming out on YouTube with some of the veteran channels and so on, and the dark humor that comes from the military has always been around. They pull out pictures of things that the guys did in World War II, going all the way back, and people haven't changed. And if you haven't been around the military, then, you know, I just have pity on you, because you don't have anybody who's ever been in a real situation where having training matters, where you have to put your feelings aside. And when you game, if you're gaming, let's be honest, most of these games come from a military background. If you know anything about Dungeons and Dragons, you know that it did. And Traveler and all of them. So you're in space combat and you're shooting at people. Does no one die in your games? This falls back into the same thing about how traumatic it is that a player character dies. Oh, that's gotta, I put on an X card saying, oh, but my character can't die. Well, okay, that does some interesting things. It sort of, I'll use the term, wussifies the game. If there's no threat that your character can't be killed or maimed, then what are you doing? You're just rolling dice and talking, and you could be playing some other game. You're not really playing a game with any stakes. If your character can't die, well, then you're not playing. You're playing some superhero game. You're not playing anything with any grit to it. Why does Game of Thrones enthrall so many people? Because it's gritty. Because people die. Because things happen. You see people getting flayed. You see what happened to Theon. Theon, Theon, that's a topic in Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is extremely popular. Don't you want to run a game that people talk about like they talk about Game of Thrones? Or do you want to run a game, oh, we were playing Hoops and Ladders or something like that. It's just so exciting. No, I want a game that has some meat on its bones, that affects you, that makes you think, that maybe makes you squirm because things are happening. Well, which would you prefer? For me, I know what I prefer. I have too much, I said, I'm probably going to be dead I've got 50-50 chance of being dead by the end of the year. And I don't have time for any of these snowflakes who get so offended and can't handle this. So I'm starting my game up. I've already done my session 0 and I'm doing my first session starting in a couple of days. There are some announcements around about that one. But if you're a snowflake, don't come near my game. Don't watch it. Don't watch the videos because it will offend you and I don't care. So thank you for watching my video. I look forward to learning what you think about this video. Let me know in the comments below. If you like the video, press the thumbs up button. You can subscribe by clicking the link in the lower left. If you are interested, there are links to more content.